Tough Tony Spilotro was one of the most feared mobsters to ever land in Las Vegas. Law enforcement suspected him in as many as 26 murders. The story of Spilotro and his crew was fictionalized in the movie Casino. The true version of his 1986 murder wasn't revealed until a sensational trial more than 2 decades later.
The vicious, merciless character Nicky Santoro, played by Joe Pesci in the film Casino, was based on a real-life underworld villain. Anthony Spilotro, also known as Anthony the Ant Spilotro, was every bit his ruthless portrayal in the film. Much like in the film, he was brutally beaten to death after forsaking the oaths of the Cosa Nostra. He was born in 1938 into the tough streets of Chicago. He was born one of 6 kids, all boys, to his Italian-American immigrant parents, Pasquale and Antoinette. They ran a restaurant in the city called Patsy's Restaurant, which quickly became a hangout of the Italian-American mafia. He and his brothers became known faces in the neighbourhood as kids, committing petty crime from a young age. This included crimes like snatching purses and shoplifting. Much like in the film, he overcame his height disadvantage of only being 5'2" with vicious aggression. Despite his small stature, he formed a reputation as a fighter and someone not to be messed with. With somewhat of a Napoleon complex, he began to bully other teens in the neighbourhood. In 1954, tragedy struck the family when his father died, leaving his mother to raise 6 sons on her own. After the death, Anthony would drop out of school to focus on his criminal career. He was first arrested at 16 after trying to steal a t-shirt from a shop. This was the first of a string of arrests for petty crime that he amassed into his early 20s. Throughout this time, he became increasingly immersed in gang culture and befriended several mobsters. This included Vincent the Saint Incero, Joseph Joey the Clown Lombardo, and mob boss Joseph Joey Doves Ayupa. In 1962, he would join Mad Sam Di Stefano's crew. Di Stefano was a violent sadist whose influence terrified mafia victims. The mafia believed him to be too much of a loose cannon to be considered for leadership, but was revered and used for his ability to instill fear in people. This was who would steer Anthony Spilotro into the ruthless killer he became. His first known murder contract was a hit against 2 24-year-olds named Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia. The burglars were known as the M&M Boys, and the subsequent crime would be known as the M&M Murders. The M&M Boys would earn their demise after also killing 2 thieves. However, the crime was committed in Elmwood Park, a mafia location. As many mob bosses lived in Elmwood Park, murder was considered off limits in the area. Spilotro was used to send a message and gave the 2 a long death. McCarthy would have his head placed in a vice and squeezed until his eye popped out. Later that year, the 2 victims would be found in the trunk of a car in South Chicago. In 1963, Spilotro became a made man. This is when he was given the responsibility of controlling bookmaking territory in northwest Chicago. He began to be known by the Chicago press, who named him the Ant after his height. In that same year, Charles Chucky Grimaldi, a member of Di Stefano's crew, turned FBI informant. Grimaldi testified against him and Di Stefano in the murder trial of Leo Foreman. Leo Foreman was a loans collector who was said to throw Di Stefano out of his office earlier in the year. This was supposedly all it took to earn his murder. Di Stefano's brother Mario had invited Foreman to play cards and check out his new bomb shelter. When he arrived, Grimaldi and Spilotro dragged him into a cellar where Di Stefano was waiting. He used a hammer and ice pick to murder Foreman, and his body was left in the trunk of an abandoned car. Despite the testimony, Di Stefano and Spilotro were acquitted. In 1967, Spilotro's house was raided by the IRS, who found him to be running an illegal betting operation. However, he was only served with a fine instead of serving prison time. In the 1960s, a string of murders took place which have been associated with Spilotro. However, he has never been charged with any of these crimes. In 1971, he would replace Marshall Cafano as the mafia's representative in Las Vegas. Spilotro was to look after the operations of the casino embezzlement scheme in Las Vegas. In particular, he would oversee casino frontman Frankie "Lefty" Rosenthal, who would skim profits from the casinos. Before any revenue was recorded, Rosenthal would skim cash which would be sent to the Chicago Syndicate and other mafia families. Under the alias Tony Stewart, Spilotro took over the criminal underworld in Las Vegas. He took control of Circus Hotel gift shop also. Despite only being charged with looking after the skim operation and Rosenthal, he began to make his own moves. He made criminals pay him a street tax to continue operating in Las Vegas. Soon after his arrival, the Las Vegas murder rate began to climb. In 1976, he opened up a jewellery and electronics store named the Gold Rush with his brother Michael. The store would sell both stolen and legitimate items in the store, but Spilotro would not sell items stolen in Las Vegas to not draw unnecessary attention. He also correctly guessed the FBI had wiretapped his phone, so would not talk about any non-legitimate business on calls. Spilotro organised a crew of burglars dubbed the Hole in the Wall Gang. They would break into high-end stores, hotel rooms and fancy homes around Las Vegas. They became known as the Hole in the Wall Gang because if they couldn't find a way to break into a building, they would simply drill a hole through the wall or roof. In 1979, Sherwin Jerry Listener, a member of Spilotro's crew, was arrested for larceny. Listener planned to make a deal with the FBI and became an informant. However, word got back to Spilotro, who organised Listener's assassination. Frank Rosenthal performed the hit, wrongly believing Spilotro had been given a green light by the mob. That year, Spilotro was also banned from all casinos in Las Vegas, meaning he could not perform the job he was sent to do. The Chicago mob started to see him as a loose cannon, and word got back that he had been having an affair with Rosenthal's wife, Jerry. This meant he broke a sacred mafia bond by sleeping with another gang member's wife. In 1981, the Hole in the Wall Gang attempted to rob a store which was destined for failure. Alarm specialist Sal Romano was supposed to disable the alarm. However, unbeknownst to the gang, he had turned informant after being caught in another crime. He had told police about the robbery and they were ready and waiting. The Hole in the Wall Gang minus Spilotro were arrested on the scene. Spilotro was picked up by police 2 weeks later. Things got worse for the ant when Frank Rosenthal turned informer against him for the Listener murder after he heard a wiretap organising a hit against him. Incredibly, he was again acquitted of the murder charge after a lack of evidence. However, shortly after, he was indicted for the casino skim operation. The bosses of the Chicago mob were furious. He had compromised a bulletproof gold mining operation for his own gains. He had cost the Chicago syndicate millions in lost revenue as the operation was now too hot. He and his brother were lured back to Chicago with the suggestion that the mob would be making his brother Michael a made man in the mob. When they entered the basement, over a dozen mobsters set about them with baseball bats. After their bodies were found buried in a cornfield in Indiana, an autopsy was performed. It showed, unlike in the film where they are buried alive, that they died as a result of extreme blunt force trauma to the head and neck. So brutalised were they that they had to use dental records to find out who they were.
Essentially, the bodies of both Anthony and Michael Spilotro showed very similar injuries. The injuries were primarily blunt force injuries. They were about the head, the neck, and the chest, and to some extent the extremities.